Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another session of the Stay Healthy at Home webinar series. Today's title is You and Me, the DSP, a conversation with DSPs and the people they support. So this is a webinar hosted through the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project Stay Healthy at Home webinar series. I am the director of the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project. NJSAP is a program of the ARC of New Jersey and receives funding from the division to provide training and education to New Jersey self-advocates, self-advocacy groups, and support staff who serve in advisory capacities to the different self-advocacy groups throughout the state. So I just want to remind everyone, or if you're new here, as always, we welcome questions. We want to hear from you throughout the webinar. So feel free to type your questions in the questions tab. And if your question is not answered during the webinar, we are dedicating time at the end of our hour together to address any questions posted in that questions box. So no need to send duplicate questions. A member of our team is monitoring the questions box and we'll make sure to review and address all relevant questions at the end of the presentation. We will also post the slides that are being presented today on our website. And if you go to the handouts tab of the control panel, you'll also find a PDF version of the slides, along with a template that we're going to discuss in just a moment. So today's topic is celebrating Direct Support Professional Recognition Week. It kicked off on Sunday the 13th, and it's running for the rest of this week. So what better way to celebrate this occasion than to learn from self-advocates or people on the receiving end of direct support, as well as a few different service professionals who have a breadth of experience working in the field. So today we're really going to discuss ways to get involved in the current Direct Support Professional Recognition Week campaign that's going on right now on social media. And we are also going to discuss best practices in the field of person-centered supports and basically how to develop and maintain healthy boundaries within a support relationship. And we will be hearing from 5 different experts throughout our time together today. They'll be sharing personal experiences as well as advice on these topics. So lastly, we are going to really dig into building and maintaining the healthy bonds and boundaries with the people that are receiving support. So I'd like to kick us off with a quick 1-minute poll. We would be so appreciative if you fill this out. We're trying to figure out how you identify. So the poll is in progress right now. We're going to let it run for just a minute. Okay, so if you identify as a self-advocate, just check that box. If you identify as a direct support professional, that's your cue. If you are an agency administrator or other type of professional, a family member, sibling, and if you identify as another category, feel free to just put your identifier in the questions box. We're just trying to get a feel for who is on the webinar today. And just a couple more seconds left and we're going to wrap up. We're almost there, just about 10 more seconds left. And then I will reveal the breakdown of our audience today. This is always very exciting. Okay, just a couple more seconds. All right, so I am going to close the poll now. It looks like everybody has had a chance to participate. Well, almost everybody. Okay, so as it turns out, we have a split between our direct support professional attendees and agency administrators or other professional staff. Again, if you want to clarify your role, feel free to do that in the questions box now. We're curious to see who's here. So that's great. And we've got a 13% attendance from self-advocates and 6% from family members. Thank you guys so much for participating. All right, and as a reminder, this webinar is part of our Stay Healthy at Home series. So this kicked off back in April of 2020, kind of the height of the stay-at-home order. We are continuing this series, and we would love to hear from you as far as other topics that you'd like to see us address in the months going forward. So if you would like to register for an upcoming session of the webinar series, you can click that link right there. It is also available on our website and in the handouts section of this webinar. And we also recently launched a portal on the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project homepage. We're super excited to offer this service. It's a way to kind of streamline our training request process. So you can visit our website and click on the training homepage, and you will be brought to a form to request trainings, free trainings for students and adults with disabilities. So feel free to get in touch. All right. So as I said, we are currently in the midst of Direct Support Professional Recognition Week. And this year especially, it just feels tremendously important to celebrate and remark on the amazing work that DSPs do every single day. Back in 2015, Congress actually reaffirmed the resolution to make the second week of September for 2015 and 2016 DSP Recognition Week. In more recent years, it's kind of changed. Sometimes it's the second week of September, sometimes it's the third. But this year it's the 13th to the 18th. So there is a current campaign happening right now on social media, and the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project is managing the campaign, and we would love some input. This is a template that we created to kind of gather different responses and input about why we should recognize DSPs and the work that they do. So we created a hashtag DSP Recognition Week. So if you would like to download this template and share within your agencies and with your self-advocacy groups, you can click on the handouts tab and click the handout labeled DSP Recognition Week. You can download that and actually fill in the gray area here with your feedback. We would love to see it, so feel free to tag us on social media at NJSAP and at the ARC of NJ. So I found some great ideas for kind of celebrating the week on Anchor's website. So one idea was to collect videos from the folks that your agency supports or family members, as well as other professionals in the field, and basically talk personally about what it means to receive that excellent direct support. What kind of difference does a DSP make in your life or the life of your loved ones? I thought that was a really cool thing, and just a way for basically DSPs to hear from the people that they're supporting. It's important to extend that gratitude. It's important to take the time to acknowledge the work that goes on 365 days a year. So here's just a couple other ideas that you can check out. And again, this is from Anchor. And the National Association of Direct Support Professionals are hosting 2 different workshops this week on Zoom as a way of celebrating the week, DSP Recognition Week. So on September 15th, they'll be hosting a webinar on Zoom titled Ongoing Staff Development and Disability Services. This is a free event, and this is a live link, so you can click here and register, or copy and paste this URL into your browser, and you will be able to register for these 2 sessions. And I think this is just a way for NADSP to celebrate the work that's happening and to provide that ongoing continuing education for DSPs. So jumping into the role of a direct support professional, it's really hard to put into words, right? DSPs do so much. It is hard to quantify all of the great stuff that's happening. They are serving people in a variety of settings, and really working towards true community integration for folks with disabilities. They're helping in all aspects of life, keeping people safe and healthy, helping people form relationships within their communities, helping people manage finances and do those daily household tasks, as well as the activities of daily living, toileting, showering, changing, laundry. I mean, the list goes on. And especially, I wanted to just highlight the ability of a DSP to create and sustain those relationships with other people in the community, whether that means helping someone that you support make a connection in the community that will help them get other places or meet other people and have an outlet to go out and experience their community like anyone else. DSPs play such a critical role in the lives of so many people with disabilities. And we're going to hear from self-advocates today. We're going to hear exactly how DSPs impact their life and the types of things that they help out with, as well as how they want to receive that support. But certainly there's a lot of different duties that the DSP carries out on a day-to-day basis, and doing even more now as far as sanitizing the homes and programs to make sure folks are safe during the era of COVID-19. So I'm always interested to kind of see where academia stands on issues of importance to people with disabilities. As it turns out, there's a lot of research happening on the role of a direct support professional and how that DSP can impact the daily life of a person with a disability. So in 2001, researchers Hewitt and Lakin found that DSPs are performing labor-intensive tasks, and they actually require a complex balance of competencies. So you kind of have to have a generalist knowledge of a lot of different areas in order to provide that quality care. And interestingly, they found that a DSP's role also included raising the public's awareness and appreciation for the roles that they do, right? And it's part of advocacy organizations also stepping in and highlighting all that work that's happening. I'll reference the Coalition for a DSP Living Wages campaign that's been happening for the past several years here in New Jersey. Many members of the public aren't aware of the support that's happening in group homes, supervised apartments, and programs for adults with disabilities throughout the state. So that's part of our role today with this webinar, highlighting the work that's happening, sharing that, letting people hear from the people providing support as well as receiving the support, what it means to have that quality support in your life. Also, no surprise here, but DSP continuity was identified as a major indicator of quality of life for people with disabilities. So the more a person with a disability experienced change in terms of the direct support, the more that they were reporting dissatisfaction. They were finding that they weren't as connected to their community. They weren't as stable in their other relationships in their life, and they weren't experiencing optimal choice or goal setting. So that's part of why we want to bring parity to DSP wages. We want to keep quality staff in the field and create that career path. So great DSPs stay here with us, and there's not that revolving door happening. So yeah, there's a lot of research happening, and I just sampled a couple different research articles here, but absolutely DSPs are taking on a wide variety of tasks, and really they can help a person with a disability experience self-determination and experience access to different areas of their community, whether it be physically transporting someone to a social event or a spiritual event or a recreational event, or just helping to facilitate those conversations with other members of the community. So moving on to the remainder of this webinar is really going to be set up so that we hear from self-advocates and DSPs. These 5 individuals were interviewed in preparation for this webinar. I think it's tremendously important to hear from the people on the receiving end of services to make sure that we're providing services that are in line with best practices. And Andrew and Richard and Jessica Lax had a lot to say on this topic. Corinne and Onika identify as direct support professionals with many years of experience. So I'm really excited to be able to show these clips and share these clips with you, because the advice and the expertise and the experiences that were shared are fantastic. And we truly appreciate the time, thoughtful consideration that each person dedicated to this project. So moving right into our first video clip, I would be remiss if we didn't kick off our discussion on the role of a DSP without some input from folks receiving direct support each day. So let's hear from Richard and Andrew. Make sure volume's up. Okay. So as part of the interview process, each person was presented with the same set of questions. And when we discussed what the role of a DSP was, Richard and Andrew basically said, you know, helping provide services that I need. And my needs aren't the same as his needs or her needs. They really focused on the individual aspect of that support, and even how that might change from day to day. You know, you're having a day where you don't need as much support, staff are flexible in acknowledging that. And Andrew elaborated on when I asked him kind of what does it mean? What does a satisfying life look like? He elaborated on the need for a balance between activity, rest, and really having time to strive for personally meaningful goals, whether they be fitness and weight loss goals or educational goals. He also remarked that, you know, providing support to someone, you need to acknowledge that sometimes that person just needs a break, right? And just time to sit back, have a coffee, and enjoy life. So a DSP plays that active role when needed, but also hangs back when the person on the receiving end of the support needs that alone time or needs that just time to be by themselves and relax. And we're going to now hear from Jessica Lax, who is a licensed social worker as well as a self-advocate.
People are people, and so there is no exception here either. You're really going to want to make sure that you're treating someone as you would like to be treated, in the way that you're accustomed to being treated.
So that's the golden rule, right? Treat others as you would like to be treated. And I think that can run like a ticker tape across the mind of every support professional, not just professionals who are supporting people with disabilities, but any caring professional, doctors, nurses, counselors. We want to make sure that we're treating people how we would expect to be treated, and also how we are accustomed to being treated. So this extends to all types of interactions, including verbal prompts and requests before providing hands-on care, activities of daily living. And again, before we're providing that physical assistance, Jessica really highlighted the need to think about it in terms of what we would want. Would we want a heads up, like, hey, I'm about to turn you this way, or I'd like to turn you over so I can do this activity? So I just thought that was a really great way to sum up, ideally, how we want support professionals to approach care for people with disabilities. And we are now going to hear from Corinne, who has 19 years of experience in the field. And when we think about the role of a direct support professional in the life of a person with disabilities, we can think about all of those tangible things that DSPs do, like we mentioned before, the changing, you know, helping with food prep, helping maintain someone's living space, or showering, and all those personal care items. But there's also so much qualitative work that's happening, the emotional support and the respect of personhood and the respect for boundaries within that working relationship. So I'd like to hear from Corinne.
I think the role of a DSP or direct support professional, we really have to focus on the professional piece of that. Establishing boundaries, recognizing that it's an exceptionally rewarding job and that there are similarities to friendship within it, being a good listener, offering good advice. But it is a paid position, and because it's a career, you really need that boundary of the professionalism in recognizing you're supporting the person in their whole life, that it's not about you, it's not a compromise. It's the focus is on the person.
So as Corinne remarks, the establishment of boundaries is really critical. And boundaries look a little bit different for every person, for all of us in all of our different relationships. But in a support relationship where there's a paid caregiver and someone receiving support, these boundaries should still be clearly outlined and discussed. And if those boundaries are crossed, that should be addressed immediately or as soon as possible after the boundary is crossed. So I think it's a really incredibly important aspect of the support relationship that DSPs help the people that they're supporting in establishing these boundaries. This may be an unfamiliar topic for a person with a disability who's used to receiving care from multiple people in a single day, or in a, seeing support staff, again, come into their life and leave, come in and go out. So it's really important that, as Corinne said, DSPs focus on the professional piece of that relationship and model appropriate behavior in terms of physical boundaries, as well as emotional boundaries. There are things that can be discussed in a professional setting versus in a more informal setting. So I think Corinne does a really great job of highlighting the fact that it is a paid professional relationship, and it may look like and feel like a friendship or even a family relationship. But most of all, a great DSP acknowledges that when you are in that job and in that role, your professional duty is to support that person in their whole life. And the decisions and choices made might not always align with what you believe. But again, as the professional, it's up to you to set that appropriate behavior and what that looks like. And like Jessie said, respecting the boundaries of physical touch, asking for permission and things like that. So we're going to move on to a video featuring Onika Clark, who is a DSP. And I think that another really important aspect of the support relationship relates to kind of entering the field with an open mind. I know that we have a bunch of DSPs in this webinar today, and I'm so excited to hear that. And I would imagine everybody has kind of a different level of experience. Some of the folks on the call today may be DSPs who've worked in the field for many years. If you're new, I think that Onika's advice here will really resonate.
Okay, so coming into this job, not knowing exactly how I would have fit in, I took time to get to know the individuals on a personal, one-on-one level, where they actually teaches us as DSP what they need us, where they need us to reach them. They teach us how to serve them. And coming in not feeling sorry for the person with a disability, but just wanting to make a change in their lives so that they would have, a better quality of life. As a DSP, I would say to someone coming in, whatever your preconceived notions are about these individuals, before you come in, leave it at the door. You come in with an open mind. You come in ready to service. You allow yourself to be in the environment and learn from the people. You have to sit back and let them teach you the things that you need to know about being around them. And it's just allowing them to teach us how to serve them.
So I think that Onika's comments can be related to that old adage. If you've met a person with a disability, you've met exactly one person with a disability. Not all people with Down syndrome act this way, and not all people on the spectrum behave in this way. People are people, right? So I love that Onika highlighted the importance of coming into the field with an open mind and a willingness to learn from the people receiving support. Self-advocates are amazing teachers, and many of the folks that we're supporting may be older than us and may have more wisdom and experience. And I think that acknowledging that and capitalizing on all of the things that you can learn as a professional from the people you support is really an important aspect of being a great DSP. So, and just another note that disability has an individual impact. So one person may be more impacted by their diagnosis, while another person may only feel that their diagnosis affects their life in a small way or only in certain areas of life. So it's important to be able to support people where they're at and with what they need. That really makes it person-centered. That really makes it individualized. And I think Onika really kind of summed that up. All right. And looking at the ARC of the United States position statement on individual supports, I pulled this because I think that it explains in a really succinct way what that means. And we want to make sure that as an advocacy organization, as people who are working in the field to support people with disabilities, we're really committed to this practice. This is a best practice. So when we are providing support, we can really look for opportunities to engage folks in their community. It is very challenging right now, absolutely. We're less out in the community and more at home or more in small groups. But as much as possible, help folks develop those individual interests. So there's a ton of great resources online. If someone's into video games, video game design, oh my gosh, there's forums, there's websites, we host brain games every Thursday, hop on and join us. There are so many different ways to develop those interests now, even while we're spending more time at home. And really looking at how the person's plan is applied, because every person has that ISP. There's an individualized support plan, and the emphasis should be on the individual. So just thinking about the folks that you work with, how much does their plan really encapsulate their personality, their goals, and their dreams? Just something to think about when we're working with folks. So we're going to get into a couple more interviews and some advice from DSPs about how to really make those goals and dreams real. But just know that when we're sitting in on ISP meetings or preparing for them, it really is about that person and helping that person, again, advocate for themselves and making sure that the goals of the individual are understood by everybody that's part of their support team. So again, I thought this was a nice example of what it means to provide those individual supports and what that looks like. So yeah, moving on to another clip with Andrew and Richard. We were specifically talking about support plans in this part of the interview. So Richard and Andrew, as two self-advocates who have plans and who participate in their meetings, they had a lot to say about what that means and how it impacts their daily life. But let's hear from Richard. So at the ISP meetings, the individual that the plan is made for wants that respect. They want the respect from everybody on the team, knowing that they do know what they want. And it's up to a support team to kind of maybe find outlets for those interests and find ways to build those skills or reach those dreams. But I think this really sums it up. Richard went on to discuss the various tasks that his staff assist him with on a daily basis. But again, in terms of individualizing supports, Richard emphasized that his staff respect the balance between supporting him with the things he does need help with, but also encouraging him to do the things he can do on his own. So that in and of itself is a sign of respect, right? It's towing the line between the support that a person needs versus the support that a person can give themselves with a little bit of extra time or with less hands-on input. So really both self-advocates in this clip talked about the need for just a basic respect and being able to speak their mind at their meeting, and how DSPs in preparing for those meetings can help set the stage of the individual, the self-advocate coming in and kind of leading and letting the folks on the support team know what they need and avoiding essentially a repeat of the previous year's meeting. So it all comes down to respect for the person. All right, and now we are going to hear from Jessica. And I want to preface this clip by saying that it touches on a topic that affects us all. We want to make sure that anytime we're working with adults with disabilities, those folks are being treated with respect for their age, for their experience, for their wisdom. We certainly always want to avoid any stereotyping or infantilizing that can happen. And I think Jessie does a really nice job of summing up the best way of providing respectful, person-centered support to adults.
Adulthood only happens once, just like childhood. You don't get to relive portions of your life. It comes and goes. So remember who you're interacting with. Remember who you're helping. Remember who you're spending time with. A 45-year-old man or woman is always going to be, for the year that they're 45, they're always going to be 45.
Right.
So if you're interacting with them, this should always be in the back of your mind. You don't want to suddenly, let's say, dip down into a tone of voice that would suggest you're speaking to someone younger. You really want to make sure that your words and actions reflect who it is you're speaking to, and that you give them, the level of respect that they deserve based on their chronological age.
Well said. I think that this was a really compelling part of the interview because Jessica talks about avoiding what she described as the accidental erasure of adulthood. So that happens when staff are, and again, well-meaning staff and parents are doing for someone instead of helping that person build the skills that they might need to accomplish a goal on their own, no matter how small that goal is. So Jessica talks about essentially treating someone in a way that vastly differs from their chronological age. And we see this all over the place. But as she says, if you're working with an adult, a 40-year-old, 50-year-old, whatever the case is, treating that person with respect regardless, but essentially knowing that you're working with an adult. And there's no, in terms of self-advocacy in this field, the idea that someone could, quote unquote, have the mentality of, insert age here, or have the brain functioning of, that's not what we want to focus on. We want to focus on the fact that we are working with, largely, a lot of us on this call are working with adults. So treating people based on their chronological age is incredibly important. avoiding the tone of voice that dips down into the kind of sing-song way of speaking to a child. Avoid that, wipe that out. We want to make sure that best practice dictates we are working with adults, we're speaking to people as adults. And we're going to move into another clip now where Corinne talks about the ISP meetings and person-centered planning and how that process kind of changes over time.
And we do have that person-centered plan, which is so valuable. But I think sometimes consequence, right, because there's paperwork involved, is the copy-paste life. So sometimes when you're looking at that person-centered plan, I think it's also good to step back and ask, well, how many years maybe has this been copied and pasted, right? So even something with food, you know, Bobby doesn't like vegetables. Well, was that copied and pasted since 1995 in his person-centered plan? When was the last time that the individual actually got to try that thing that supposedly they like or don't like? We're constantly changing, and it's so important that people with disabilities have the opportunity to try new things and kind of change their interests or their likes and dislikes. That's another thing that I think of a lot when it comes to working with people with disability.
So I think that, like Corinne says, helping people revisit their plans and prepare to create new plans each year is definitely something that DSPs should be doing and be comfortable doing, because those ISP, IHP, those plans dictate activities, goals, and essentially your job function throughout an entire year. So DSPs do play an exceptionally important role at those meetings and in preparing for those meetings, because DSPs are providing support, certainly at the meetings, but they can also help self-advocates prepare to go into those meetings. Richard and Andrew talk about, you know, wanting the respect and wanting to be viewed as people who other support staff can learn from. So DSPs can help the person practice their self-advocacy skills, maybe keeping a journal or kind of a list of talking points that they want to discuss at the meeting. Preparing that in advance can be really helpful, just like I'm sure many of us prepare notes before an important meeting or before we go see our doctor. We want to remember all the things that we want to talk about because it's a high stakes meeting. It only happens once a year. So Corinne also advises us to revisit the items in the plan with the person, because we want to avoid that copy and paste, just assuming someone still has an aversion to a certain activity or a certain food, or you know, like she said, we're all constantly evolving and changing. So revisiting the things that are included in plans is definitely a best practice. This is something we want to do. If the plan is meant for the individual, it should absolutely reflect that person's current likes, dislikes, choices, and goals. And as part of the interview process, we did discuss challenges of the job. And here Onika is going to discuss perceptions and bias.
There is a sense of ignorance, I think, with the people in the world that's not connected to individuals with developmental and intellectual disability.
So DSPs can definitely play a role in challenging those bias, whether it's with members of our own families or communities. As people working in the field, as professionals learning from self-advocates, we can challenge those stereotypes in our own lives, as well as help self-advocates challenge those perceptions and bias in their lives. The most obvious example would be if, let's say, a medical professional defers to you as the professional at a medical appointment instead of the patient who has a disability. Turn the attention back to the person with a disability. This can be applied in so many different settings, but it's very important to remain committed to that. The person should be able to advocate for themselves as much as possible and as much as they're comfortable, and they should be perceived as the expert of their own goals, and care. And we can definitely play a part in changing that and flipping that perception.
Perception of people with disabilities is probably the biggest barrier for them. As a person with a disability, you want to be the best possible employee, the best possible person in and out of the community that you can be. And this goes for anyone, disability or not. But unfortunately, people with disabilities also have to deal with and even plan ahead for perceptions that might exist within the community in regards to how they're going to behave, how they're going to act, how they're going to respond, even how someone would be judged based on first impressions in terms of appearance. And that also becomes an issue when you're considering visible versus invisible disabilities. Someone with a visible disability may present more quickly than others who have more invisible disabilities. But unfortunately, this doesn't preclude people with invisible disabilities still having to deal with that perception piece. So perception is definitely one of the toughest things to deal with, especially because the perceptions that people with disabilities come to face play a role in our own internalized feelings. And so then we have to try to overcome and maybe, I guess the word is ignore how perceptions may or may not affect us and those around us internally and externally.
And do you think that direct support professionals or just members of someone's support team in general can help to prepare someone to take on those perceptions, to address those perceptions?
Yeah, so there's obviously a bunch of different ways that this can be done, but I imagine first and foremost, asking for consent or waiting for consent rather, if you are the DSP, before you go and assist someone, I think is paramount. Really acknowledging that the person that you're working with has a story and has a life.
So I think that is so critical to remember as members of support teams and members of a household that's providing support to people. We want to make sure that we're facilitating that self-advocacy and the need for consent and respect in all activities in all areas of life. So I think Jessie does a really nice job of summing up what those perceptions can feel like to people with disabilities, and also how the respect and the expectation of respect can be built in at home. So a little bit more about boundaries, because I don't think we can talk about boundaries enough. Corinne is going to talk about the training that DSPs get, as well as best practices in establishing boundaries while on the job.
When you start out in this job, I think it's so important to focus on the trainings. New Jersey is wonderful in that they offer consistent trainings to all the agencies, so you have a foundation, a baseline to kind of have that shared knowledge to go from.
Yeah.
When you're starting out, I think that if you are a compassionate and caring person, that's what the job takes at its core. But then looking into your own maybe biases, maybe some stereotypes, even really good people sometimes have some preconceived notions that they need to overcome, that they need to get past. So when you're starting out in the job, you might even work with coworkers who you see doing some bad habits, and just, focus on the training and how you do this job right. So for example, some individuals, when they're referring to people with disabilities, might say, my guys, or, my girls. And when you think about it, that's not really appropriate in a professional world, right? It's emotionally possessive, like my mother, my children. And it can be kind of belittling in that way as well. You're not owning the individuals that you support. So just making sure that the respect comes out in everything, including the way you speak.
Yeah, so the idea of emotionally possessive language comes up somewhat often, because as Corinne said, even well-meaning staff, family members, teachers can feel a connection with the people that they're supporting. But always remember that, again, if you're supporting adults, treat people as adults, and you are the professional in that setting. So I like that Corinne brought up the idea of this type of language, the possessive language. We want to make sure that we're addressing people by their names whenever possible, and not and straying away from the idea that people are part of somehow a larger group. When we're providing individual support, it's about that person. So we can lead by example. So if you're someone who's in a management position, not using that type of language and not expressing ownership over or an emotional connection to quote unquote these guys or these girls is really, really important. As Corinne said, it's often very well-meaning staff, but we want to make sure that we are sticking with best practices. So treating people as individuals, providing that individualized care, and addressing people by their names. So a little bit more about language. Jessie is going to discuss person first versus identity first language, and that impact on the impact on the individual. I should say that there's no clear consensus in the field of disability services or self-advocacy in regards to person first versus identity first. So Jessie has some good advice on how to proceed.
So people with disabilities are usually going to guide you in some sort of way as to how they want to be addressed and spoken to, and how they want to be spoken about when you're talking about them to other people. Mm-hmm. So for example, people will kind of give you some kind of indication about whether or not they prefer person first language versus identity first language. And even if they don't necessarily spell out the definitions of those for you, you're going to get a sense of how they like to define themselves. And then what I would say is, please proceed accordingly when speaking with them. And then again, when also speaking about them to other people, because it keeps them kind of in the driver's seat as far as how they're spoken about and how they're discussed amongst others. They're definitely going to show you, and they're definitely going to tell you whether or not it's a verbal cue or a nonverbal cue. There's going to be certain signs that they want something or you to respond in a certain way or to not respond. Again, this all goes back to just really paying close attention to how they're reacting towards you and how they seem to be feeling.
And Jessie's advice here, paying attention to the individual, really harkens back to Onika's original advice of learning from the people you're supporting. There's a lot of knowledge to be had. There's a lot of experiences to be had. And know that there's a lot to learn. No matter how long you've spent in the field, there's always something new that you can learn. And Jessie is asking all of us to pay attention to that individual and what they need and adjust our support accordingly. So consent and boundary establishment was a big part of the interview process. And I'd like to hear what Onika has to say.
Yes. It is not knowing what the job entails. You would think as an outsider, you're coming in, and because they have a label of being disabled, that you're coming to fix whatever's wrong with them. And that's not our role. Our role is to come in, and even if they're verbal or nonverbal, they have a way of communicating their needs. And us being respectful of that communication is how we're able to give them whatever they need from us so that they can function.
I think what really resonates here for me is Onika's original advice of paying attention to the individual and learning from the people you support will tell you what their communication style is. You will learn if there's nonverbal cues that you need to pay attention to that. And as Jessie said, even if the person is nonverbal, asking for consent and waiting for an indicator before proceeding is how we want to model our support. That's how we want to show staff who are new coming into the field. And if we need to kind of adjust how we're providing that support, it goes back to the respect piece that Andrew and Richard discussed, allowing someone to have ownership over their body and provide some indicator of consent before proceeding, even if it's something as, something like adjusting someone's clothing or providing an act of daily care. We want to make sure we're vigilant for cues, body language, behavioral communication, all of those different aspects. And Jessie's also going to discuss the role of consent as it relates to bodily autonomy, or the idea that the individual has control over what happens to their body.
And then again, the issue of consent. Even if someone can't respond to you in a typical fashion, giving them the opportunity to have that moment where you say, okay, now I'm going to assist you in this way, or now we're going to do this. Is this okay? It's going to make a world of difference in terms of how they're feeling. First and foremost, asking for consent, or waiting for consent rather, if you are the DSP, before you go and assist someone, I think is paramount. Really acknowledging that the person that you're working with has a story and has a life. They have a personality. They have all of the qualities that anyone without disabilities would have. So just addressing them in the way that you would feel comfortable being addressed, in the way that people around you without disabilities may feel comfortable being addressed. That's going to be really important.
And having spent many years in the field at this point, I can say that over the years, I've heard different anecdotes and examples from self-advocates who have felt violated in a way when staff do not ask for consent before touching their body or providing care. And that's, again, something we can build in very quickly on a day-to-day basis, waiting for consent before doing something that involves touching someone's body or entering into someone's space. So I think Jessie provides a really great framework for how we can be respectful of that and still do our job and provide that care. I want to now go into an interview clip from featuring Corinne, where she talks about the importance of asking the right questions at support plan meetings and the role that DSPs can play in making sure ISP, IHP, the plans are reflective of individual goals.
Definitely DSPs play an exceptionally important role.
Yeah.
those meetings. And I think the difference between a decent or even good direct support professional versus the exceptional one, a good or decent DSP will listen, but an exceptional DSP will really hear what the person's saying and want to hear more. So I can think back to a meeting that I attended where there was a woman who, when it came to the big dream question, what's your big hope and dream for your life? She would always answer that she wanted to be a Lifetime television for women movie star. And everybody listened to that and said, oh, that's wonderful. But finally, we asked, why? Why? What about being on TV? Or what about that experience? Let's go deeper. And her answer surprised us all. She said that the reason why, after some patience, some time to let her think, she said, I want to get my story out. I want people to know that I've been through some really tough times and that I'm a survivor and I suffered abuse and I overcame it.
So I love this example because I think it goes deeper, right? It gets to the root of what drives people. And we may think we know. Corinne shared that she and other members of the staff might have initially assumed it was hair and makeup and wanting to be a TV star and see yourself on TV. But in reality, that person's goal was to share their experience and to be perceived as someone who has a story worth sharing, an experience that could help other people and help other people learn from her life. So I thought that was a beautiful example of really making it a point to understand what that person's goals are truly about, instead of assuming it's about something more topical or superficial, really trying to figure out how their past experiences relate to their current goals. So the ARC-US has a great future planning website, but this is a new resource that was published based on decision making. So I wanted to share this. We will also share this with our follow-up email, so look out for this, but you can also download it from the ARC United States Center for Future Planning website, which is on the resources slide of this presentation. So I also wanted to start to close our discussion and talk about opportunities for the future of the direct support workforce. Andrew and Richard had a very clear message, so let's hear that.
Work hard. You usually like not enough, but more money than you guys. They don't make enough money, so they deserve a lot more money than me.
So that's a clear message, right? Richard saying DSPs deserve way more money. They're working really hard. That's something that's going to be in our future as advocates. We want to make sure that we're continuing to work on securing a living wage for DSPs. You can participate in the Coalition for a DSP Living Wage campaign. You can advocate in terms of the New Jersey state budget to ensure there's proper funding. And you can also participate in things like the DSP Recognition Week campaign happening now. Talk about what direct support means to you and the impact that DSPs have. If you're a DSP, we need your stories. We need to hear why you're in the field, what brought you here and what keeps you here. These are the messages, the personal messages that will impact the larger advocacy community and legislators. So keep speaking up. And again, going back to the research, we know that stability in terms of support staff has a major impact on the individual receiving services. If they're constantly getting to know a different support person, they form a relationship just to have that person leave, we know that has a negative impact on overall quality of life. So I'm happy to see that researchers, academics are paying attention to this issue, but also we want to raise this issue and continue to raise this issue with legislators, our state senators, assembly members, and our senators in Washington as well in Congress. We need them to know what that direct support means. So just one final clip about the support relationship and what it means to be in the field from a direct support professional.
It's a job that I think it's not given the respect and attention that I think most times we feel a little underappreciated. But coming into this field of work, it should be a person coming in wanting to make a change, wanting to make like lifelong changes. We're here because they need us. And it's something that is so unselfish of my fellow coworkers. It's something that I wish I can tell each one of my coworkers how proud I am, especially right now, to be in a position of serving other people. It feels really, really good.
And I want to just highlight how much we as the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project and statewide Self-Advocacy Network appreciate the work that's happening. And the hope is to really continue growing and learning together. And I think Jessica does a really nice job of summing up what our hope is as advocates for the future.
The hope and the idea that people are really in this field to grow and learn together, and that we would hope that self-advocates and the people assisting self-advocates all become the best versions of the best versions of themselves by working together, by understanding one another and growing and learning together.
Absolutely, that is what we are here for. So I'm going to check the questions box and the chat box very quickly. Okay, seeing no questions or comments, I am going to just move on to a review of some resources. This is a live link to join the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project email list and to stay up to date on all of the virtual happenings that are going on. And again, I'll double check. If you have anything that you wanted to address, any final thoughts, feel free to add those to the chat and questions box now. And this is a plug for our Healthy Lifestyles Project Live. This is a virtual program that's happening every Wednesday at 11 a.m. on Zoom, and you can register by clicking right there or visiting the link on the resources handouts tab. We are doing a ton of virtual stuff. Check our YouTube page, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter accounts. We do our best to stay up to date and continue providing virtual programming while day programs are still shut down for the time being. And here's a breakdown of our daily virtual activities happening every weekday. If you would like to schedule a training with the Self-Advocacy Project, please do not hesitate to reach out to us, njsap@arcnj.org. And I do see a question here. Are there any day programs that are offering right now? As of right now, day programs are, to my knowledge, throughout the state closed. They are permitted to reopen on Monday, September 21st at a 25% capacity. That would be indoor capacity. So indoor day programs are permitted to open next Monday, September 21st, but right now, indoor day programs are not open. But if you're interested in participating in any of these activities, please just tune in to the Self-Advocacy Project's social media accounts or get in touch with us directly if you have any questions. We are still training virtually, so we'd be happy to schedule something with you or a group that you work with. We are still here for you, very much so. So thank you for that question, Bria. And thank you all for participating in today's webinar.